You are the Emperor, Emperor of the HRE, a cursed collection of over 300 semi-independent entities, constantly arguing with each other. You are also a child, an infant, an orphaned baby monarch. You are Ladislaus the Posthumous, ruling, if you can call it that, over the Duchy of Austria. You hold claims to the Kingdom of Bohemia and the Kingdom of Hungary, but you do not rule them yet. Ladislaus was born in February 1440. His father, Albert V of Austria, who was not just Duke of Austria but also King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, and freshly elected King of the Romans, had died 4 months earlier, suddenly and unexpectedly, during a military campaign in Hungary. Albert had tried to juggle 3 kingdoms while also fighting off the Hussites and keeping the nobility in line, which went about as well as you'd expect. He got crowned King of the Romans in 1438, but never made it to full emperor status because he promptly died of dysentery in 1439. The man lived fast, ruled chaotically, and went out to grab 3 crowns and some milk just to never return, which is why they called Ladislaus the Posthumous. At birth, Ladislaus technically inherited 3 crowns: Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia. But there was one slight issue: he couldn't talk, walk, or stop shitting himself. Naturally, the nobles of Central Europe saw this as a perfect opportunity to start fighting each other over who got to be his regent. Austria in 1444 is the HQ of the Habsburg family. These people made incest into foreign policy. Their strategy was simple: if it exists, marry it. If it's a cousin, even better. Which brings us to Frederick III, Ladislaus's cousin. Though with the Habsburgs that could mean brother, uncle, or legally a sandwich. Technically, he was the Duke of Styria and Carinthia. But more importantly, he was elected King of the Romans in 1440 after Albert V's death. He was eventually crowned Emperor in 1452, making him the last to get the full Pope-blessed upgrade in Rome. Frederick became Ladislaus' legal guardian, but instead of grooming him as a successor, he basically soft-locked his cousin out of his future, like how Paradox locks us out of properly playing their games with their DLC policy. He refused to hand over Ladislaus' inherited crowns and titles, kept him isolated in castles, and treated his ward more like a political insurance policy rather than a future ruler. Frederick wasn't just gatekeeping, he was spawn camping the entire dynasty. Ladislaus spent most of his childhood in political limbo, while Frederick used his name to hold Austria together like duct tape over a collapsing empire. The Holy Roman Empire in 1444 was not holy, not Roman, and definitely not an empire. It was a multiplayer game gone desync, a loose association of 300 microstates who all hated each other, but were bound by outdated rules and passive-aggressive diplomacy. Austria, as emperor, was expected to protect the princess, enforce imperial authority, and not die. Except Ladislaus couldn't even ride a horse. So Austria's role as emperor was handled by other people. Mostly Frederick, who spent more time hoarding titles and regalia than actually governing. Historically, Frederick III was notorious for being indecisive and slow to act, earning him a reputation for extreme caution. After becoming guardian of Ladislaus, he refused to hand over the Hungarian royal crown, preventing Ladislaus from being properly crowned. Instead, he kept the boy under tight control in Wiener Neustadt for over a decade, ignoring repeated demands from nobles to let him rule. In 1452, the Austrian estates had enough. They besieged Frederick's castle and forced him to hand Ladislaus over. Meanwhile, the empire limped along with barely any central authority. The Golden Bull of 1356 had created a formal electoral system, but real reform was stalled. The emperor had little actual power over the princes, most of whom were busy expanding their own influence or resisting imperial oversight. The Reichskammergericht, the imperial court, didn't exist yet, and attempts to centralize power were met with collective yawns or open rebellion. It was less an empire and more of a chaotic festival of autonomy, held together by tradition, inertia, and just enough fear of outside threats. It's easy to take history for granted, to see the world as it is, not as something that had to be rebuilt brick by brick, idea by idea. That's where today's sponsor comes in, the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. Created by Hungry Minds, a global collective of artists, scientists, and architects. This isn't your typical encyclopedia or coffee table book. With over 400 pages and 180 essential topics, it's a masterfully illustrated journey through the greatest inventions and discoveries in human history. From the wheel to writing, agriculture to architecture, navigation to nuclear theory. It's history, science, and survival all in one. Presented through gorgeous handmade illustrations that blend medieval manuscripts with engineering blueprints. It's the kind of book you'll flip through for 5 minutes and somehow lose an hour to. Whether you're a history buff, a fan of what-if scenarios, or someone who just loves learning how the world works, this book belongs on your shelf. It raised over 2.3 million on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and it's no surprise why. It's smart, beautiful, and insanely practical. A perfect gift for the thinkers, the tinkerers, and anyone who's ever wondered, if the world collapsed tomorrow, could we rebuild it? Click the link in the description to get your copy and support the minds behind the madness. While Austria was busy LARPing as a daycare, actual threats were approaching. The Ottomans were rising fast. In 1444, they had just crushed a Christian coalition at the Battle of Varna, the so-called Last Crusade. Just 9 years later, they'd take Constantinople and turn the Byzantine Empire into a memory. Hungary stood directly in their path, and Austria's dynastic link to Hungary meant they'd be dragged into the mess, whether they'd like it or not. Austria was supposed to defend the Christian world, but with what? To the west, France was consolidating power after the 100 Years' War, eyeing Burgundy, Italy, and eventually the Rhineland. The French weren't at Austria's doorstep yet, but their growing might loomed over the empire, like that one uncle loomed over you at the family reunions back in the day. Bohemia, meanwhile, was still a religious minefield after the Hussite Wars, and internal conflict could easily spiral into another heretical uprising. And let's not forget Poland and Lithuania, already a major bloc in the east, and not particularly shy about meddling in Bohemia and Hungary either. The Holy Roman Empire was, as usual, one bad coalition away from collapse. Austria in 1444 is a paradox. A broken mess of claims, titles, ambitions, and incest. And for Ladislaus the Posthumous, that paradox was personal. After finally being released in 1452, he was crowned King of Hungary and Bohemia, and for a brief moment, it looked like he might actually rule the kingdoms he technically owned since he was a baby. But his reign was short. Surrounded by scheming nobles, bitter regions, and unresolved wars, Ladislaus died in 1457 at just 17 years old. Some say it was leukemia, others whisper poison. He was the last of the Albertinian line of the Habsburgs, and his death unraveled what little unity they had managed. Hungary fell to Matthias Corvinus, the brilliant son of John Hunyadi, who rose from relative obscurity to seize the throne. Elected by the Hungarian nobility in the power vacuum left by Ladislaus' death, Matthias wasn't just a warlord. He was a Renaissance man with a standing army, a humanist court, and a deep hatred for the Habsburgs. His reign marked a brief golden age for Hungary, during which he fended off both Ottomans and Habsburg ambitions alike. Bohemia drifted. After years of internal religious conflict, noble feuds, and general Hussite hangover, the Czechs weren't in the mood to be ruled by another absentee monarch. Ladislaus' death reopened old wounds between moderate Utraquists and hardline Catholics, and Bohemia gradually slid back into factional chaos. It wouldn't see real stability until the reign of George of Podiebrad, a Hussite king with just enough political acrobatics to keep things from falling apart. The dream of a consolidated Central European monarchy collapsed again. And what about Frederick III? He lived to 77, an absurd age for the 15th century, and outlived nearly every rival, heir, and regent. He ruled slow, cautious, and painfully methodical. In 1462, when his own brother Albrecht VI exploited discontent among the Austrian nobility and besieged him in Vienna, Frederick didn't counterattack or lead a dramatic defense. Instead, he waited. The siege only ended when King George of Podiebrad of Bohemia intervened and brokered a compromise. Albrecht would co-rule in Vienna for 8 years, but fate, or maybe something more Habsburg, intervened. In December 1463, Albrecht died suddenly inside the palace in Vienna, just as tensions were flaring again, and another fraternal war seemed inevitable. Frederick, once the weaker brother hiding behind walls, emerged victorious by doing what he did best: surviving. It wouldn't be the last time someone who threatened Frederick's position died unexpectedly. A man who took decades to act, but always seemed to outlive his problems. Frederick survived every rival and crisis, not through bold strategy, but through sheer, suffocating patience. And in doing so, he cemented the Habsburgs' grip on the empire for generations. Austria in 1444 wasn't a powerhouse. It wasn't unified, efficient, or even particularly stable, but it mattered, because from this mess would slowly grow an empire. A Habsburg empire that would go on to dominate European politics for centuries.